Do you ever get those ads that are like, 5 things that scientists don't want you to know about losing belly fat? Yeah, I get those all the time when I open up certain things like weather.com. And to be honest, either those ad creators are hanging out with the wrong kind of scientists, or they've never actually talked to a scientist, because most scientists and engineers, provided their work isn't classified, are so excited to talk to you. They're overjoyed that you're asking questions. They want to share what they're doing. They want to tell you their findings. It's incredible. And it's why this episode today, and hopefully several more in the future, exists. So today, I'm really excited to bring you the inaugural episode of what I'm calling STEMdentity Journal Club. So my goal is once a month to put out the STEMdentity Journal Club episode where I dive into one paper a month and I interview the lead author or a major contributing author on the paper. Ideally, a peer-reviewed published paper, but maybe some of them will be white papers and other similar types of work. I started STEMdentity Journal Club selfishly to force myself to find and read research outside of my own narrow field, to get a little bit more excited about things outside of my field, to remind myself that there's all this other amazing science and engineering going on, and that learning about anything is worthwhile, not just the things that, happen to be directly related to my research. It's worked awesome so far. I've seen some amazing papers, and I'm so honored of the response I've gotten from the people I've reached out to so far, especially today's guest. So today I'm talking with Dr. Eric Boyd. He's a professor of Department of Microbiology and Cell Biology at Montana State University. And the paper we're talking about, published in 2005 in PNAS Nexus. PNAS is proceeding of the National Academies of Science. And the paper is Seismic Shifts in the Geochemical and Microbial Composition of a Yellowstone Aquifer. And when I saw this paper, it immediately caught my eye because I love Yellowstone. Yellowstone is a really special place to me. Growing up in Ogden, Utah, Yellowstone's about a 4 to 5 hour drive away from where we were. We went all the time as a family, went 2 to 3 times a year. So I've been there over 30 times in my life. I can't wait to get back again soon. It's a very magical, special place for me. Of course, it has the geysers and the hot springs. There's not that much Wi-Fi in Yellowstone, which is great. Very few hotspots, but it has the geysers and the hot springs and the hot pots, which are incredible. And if you've never seen them, absolutely worth it. But it also has all of these other features. It's just amazing nature, these waterfalls that are spectacular, rivers. The Yellowstone Lake is vast and so gorgeous. There's all this amazing wildlife, bison, bears, wolves. Yellowstone for me is the pinnacle of nature. So to be able to talk to someone that got to build a lab around doing research out of Yellowstone was a true dream come true for me. This interview is so cool. Dr. Boyd was so generous with his time, and I can't wait for you to hear it. So let's go. One of my most favorite ways of getting excited about science and engineering is talking to scientists and engineers who are really excited about what they do. Welcome to STEMdentity Journal Club. Every month, we're going to take an article and talk to its lead author to learn more about the amazing work that they've done. Let's meet today's guest. Well, thanks so much, Dr. Eric Boyd, for joining us today on what is the inaugural episode of STEMdentity Journal Club. So I'd like to first start off with, who you are and more specifically, so I see that you got your PhD at Montana State University in 2007. So maybe a little bit on what happened in between grad school and professor life. And then also, if I look through your publications list, I see paper after paper that hints at Yellowstone, right? Either it says in the title Yellowstone or Warm Springs, Hot Springs. I also see on your website you're working in places like China, the Great Salt Lake. How have you managed to set up, a thriving research group that gets to go to all of these amazing places in the world to do your research?
Well, it hasn't been easy. It's taken a lot of effort and time. Some good, some bad. Just like anything that if anything that you want, you got to put time and effort into achieving. But to answer your first question, yeah, I got my PhD at Montana State University. I grew up in Iowa, so let's start there. I grew up in
Yeah.
Iowa. I grew up with a fascination of minerals. Um, just as a hobby, I loved collecting rocks and actually wanted to go to medical school. But I saw a really interesting talk by a professor at Montana State University as an undergraduate discussing microbes that lived off of minerals as they form biofilms, essentially surface-associated microbial communities that instead of breathing oxygen like you and I are doing, that they breathed minerals like elemental sulfur. And I remember going back to the lab I was working in there and just being blown away by that concept. And that's what really drew me to Montana State. And so I got my PhD at Montana State University studying microbes that breathed minerals in hot springs. And essentially, I've never left. I've never left Montana State University because, quite frankly, if you're obsessed with microbes that breathe minerals in hot springs, there's really no better place to be. And so I got my PhD in 2007 after 4 years of graduate work, and then started in as a postdoc and was fortunate enough to get in, was selected as a NASA postdoctoral fellow. And that's what really kickstarted everything for me. It gave me the flexibility to expand my research outside of the area that my postdoc advisor was interested in working in. So my postdoc advisor was, ironically, he was a structural biologist. He studied the evolution of proteins at a structural level. And so that was very different than what I was used to working on as a graduate student. But it was very important in my own development. But he allowed me essentially, I had my own money at that point. So he allowed me to start studying and working with other professors, including a guy named Mark Skidmore, who got me excited about studying a life that breathes minerals underneath glaciers and ice sheets, of all places. Another professor down in Salt Lake City who studies the Great Salt Lake and how microbes actually make minerals, stromatolites, for example. And so it seems like a long time. So 2007 to when I got my tenure track position at Montana State, 2014. During those 7 years, it was a busy time expanding my research program, building a name for myself within NASA and within the NSF community and just within the geobiology community in general. That really set the stage for me getting my tenure track position that I'm working on now.
Yeah, so maybe for those of us listening that aren't necessarily in kind of the geosciences realm, why would NASA care about, stuff breathing off of rocks underground?
It's such a good question. So NASA's charge, let's just step back and say, okay, what's NASA's charge? Well, NASA's charge is trying to understand the origin, evolution, and distribution of life, not just on Earth, but in the universe. And so many people in your audience may not know this, but some of them might know this. But so Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Life originated somewhere maybe 3.8 to 4 billion years. That's kind of a gray area. We don't have evidence for life that old, but we can look back that far using evolutionary or phylogenetic methods. But oxygen, again, the oxidant that you're breathing in that allows you to burn your breakfast, lunch, or dinner that you ate, it didn't start to accumulate in the atmosphere or the biosphere for that matter until about 2.4 billion years ago. And it was another close to 1.8 billion years before it rose to the level that's atmospheric concentrations today. And so what that means is that life on early Earth couldn't have breathed oxygen because it wasn't available. And so life originated in an environment where oxygen was not available, meaning that it had to have breathed something other than oxygen, such as, say, elemental sulfur, or even this will get you CO2 gas. So microbes actually can breathe CO2 gas, some of them. I mean, so that's how life originated on Earth. Well, then if you want to take the most parsimonious view of how life might have originated on another planet, well, it probably took a long time for photosynthesis, this complex process of photosynthesis, to evolve on those planets as well. So if you're looking for life on another planet, let's look for the simplest forms of life, those forms of life that originated earlier than complex forms of life on Earth, the microbes that breathe other oxidants. Okay, and so that's why essentially NASA is interested in studying microbes that breathe breathe something other than oxygen. I'll just also point out that there's a lot of evidence that early forms of life inhabited high temperature environments. So that's the connection to Yellowstone. You can study organisms that breathe all sorts of different non-oxygen bearing oxidants on Earth and other environments, but the connection to Yellowstone is that it looks like life may have originated on Earth in a hot environment. So that's the analogous nature of hot springs.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really great, very clear explanation. And then to tie that out, the significance portion of your PNS Nexus paper that we're talking about today hints at Mars. So does Mars have similar hot springs-like environments on it?
Well, not today, not
Okay.
today. So essentially Mars is too small.
Mm.
Okay, so it's in what we call the Goldilocks zone of our solar system. So there's some aspects of Mars that make it really attractive for originating or at least supporting life, and there's other aspects that make it less attractive. And early during Mars's history, so Mars is as old as Earth is, and for probably the first 500 million, maybe billion years of Mars's history, it looks like it had a lot of liquid water on it. But then that all got blown away. It essentially got sucked out into space. It's the size of Mars is too small to hold on to those volatiles, and so Mars kind of dried up, if you will. And so if you're going to look for evidence for life on Mars today, you want to go deep into the subsurface of Mars. But that wasn't the case on the early history of Mars. And so there was liquid water, and actually, some of NASA's rovers have actually found evidence for minerals on the surface of Mars that exist today that formed a long, long time ago that only form in hydrothermal type settings. And so there's evidence that there was hot springs on Mars, acidic hot springs even on Mars. And so little question that there's an active hydrothermal system on Mars. Now, the tie into the PNAS Nexus paper that you just discussed, that's where we try to tie in seismic activity and its influence on subsurface biospheres. The really cool thing is that NASA has essentially landed seismometers on Mars. We don't think NASA or Mars is necessarily geologically active today. Maybe it is still slightly. We don't know for sure, but one thing we do know for sure is that there are the equivalent of earthquakes on Mars that have been detected, and those are called Marsquakes. And so the same types of processes could be involved in supporting life on Mars as those that we think are important in supporting subsurface life on Earth today.
I mean, not to call myself out for having an Earth-centric view, but it never would have occurred to me that an earthquake on not Earth would not be an earthquake. So I love that it's Mars quakes.
Yeah, that struck. I remember feeling the exact same way when I read that Mars quakes. Yes, that's what we should call them appropriately. But definitely not the way I would have initially termed those.
Yeah, that's amazing. So we've already, we're already diving a little bit into the paper. So let's dig in. I mean, without even making it to the abstracts, if you look at the co-author list, it's this really cool collaboration between microbiology people, geologists. Is this kind of the culmination of a long-standing relationships over time? How did this team come together?
Yeah, good. Another great question. So let's go back almost to when I was a graduate student. So back in 2008, 2009, I had just graduated. I developed this really strong interest in geological hydrogen and how geological hydrogen supports microbial communities and in particular in subsurface environments. And a professor named Tullis Onstadt, one of the pioneers of subsurface geomicrobiology, reached out to me. He knew I was interested in this. I'd gone to a workshop that he organized in South Africa that essentially focused on that topic, and he reached out to me and essentially made me aware that these geophysicists and geologists were drilling these new boreholes in Yellowstone National Park, right in our backyard, and I had no clue. Nobody had any idea. It wasn't as though it was, confidential or anything like that. It just, it's a small circle of people that probably knew this. he made me aware of it. And so I traveled down to Yellowstone, 2 hours as it was, and found these people drilling a well. In this case, it was a well near Norris Geyser Basin. That's obviously not something that's easy to get permission to do, right? Inside of a national park, it's protected, but the reasons for them doing that, I think, are completely substantiated. And that is, Yellowstone sits atop one of the world's largest volcanoes, and it's active, and so there's a huge hazard there for people that live not just in the local vicinity of Yellowstone, but really the entire Western United States and even Midwest United States. And so what they were doing is drilling these wells and then outfitting them with state-of-the-art seismometers and tilt meters and all of these things to monitor the volcano. Well, this also provided an opportunity to sample for microorganisms, and so I went down to Yellowstone and met these people, and I met a guy named Dave Minson, who was actively in charge of that project, and essentially just kept the conversation going between him and myself and Tulla Sonstad, and then about in 2017, so several years later, almost a decade later, um, decided that let's we just published this paper looking at other mechanisms of geological hydrogen production underneath glaciers for as distant as that is. And essentially we found that when glaciers, what do glaciers do? They it's ice sliding over the top of rock. They abrade bedrock, and essentially they cause silica radicals to form on the surface of these silicate minerals. So like quartz or sand essentially. Um, and when those silicate radicals react with water, they make molecular hydrogen. And then that fuels this diverse, expansive microbiome underneath glaciers. And we just simply, were talking one day and said, well, boy, I wonder if that same process happens in the subsurface and what could charge that? Well, kinetic energy released from seismic events, what do? Well, they fracture rock in much the same way that glaciers abrade rock. And we just started throwing ideas around there and what types of people we would need to be involved in establishing such a study, and that's essentially how the proposal team got worked out.
And I see that the paper was supported by, I think, a Keck grant. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, that's really important. So any graduate student, postdoc, or early career faculty member, well, actually any faculty member for that matter, we've all gone through this process. It's really hard to get money to support your research, right? It's a real competitive environment out there, and one of the things you'll always hear people say is, high risk research, even though it's high reward, sometimes reviewers just say, well, that's too risky.
Mm.
It's too risky to propose to do that. The potential is that you're going to come away from that 3 or 5 year study, despite us giving you, say, $300,000 or $1 million, where it's just not going to work. But that high risk research is often high reward.
Yeah.
And so most funding agencies, because their budgets are so slim, um, need to validate and need to verify, that their funding was spent, appropriately. And so they're somewhat adverse to high risk research just by nature. And the reviewers and the review panels themselves are the same way. And well, you think about this, we conducted this study in Yellowstone, and there was a reason for that. Yellowstone experiences somewhere around 3,000 earthquakes a year naturally. But that still doesn't mean that you're going to be in the right place at the right time to capture, an earthquake. And so it's going to be really hard to convince, say, the National Science Foundation to pay Eric Boyd and his group of students and team of researchers to sit around Yellowstone and wait for an earthquake to happen and then sample it fortuitously. Enter the Keck Foundation. So the Keck Foundation, essentially founded by an oil man from back in the early days of the California oil rush, established a lot of money and set up this foundation to fund high risk, high reward research. So it's a perfect opportunity. And I remember talking to the people from the Keck Foundation when they came out to do their site visit with us. just really trying to build a connection with them. And it wasn't hard. And so you think about it, um, oil reservoirs um, may surprise people, but that's essentially what started people studying subsurface microbiology.
Really?
Yeah. And so oil reservoirs, and you've probably heard of there's different grades of petroleum, different grades of crude oil. Some are more sulfur rich, some are less sulfur rich, and you really don't want that sulfur rich oil because when you burn it, you make sulfur dioxide. It goes into the atmosphere and it rains out as acid rain. And so that's not desirable as an end product of fossil fuel combustion. The other problem with that high sulfur oil is that microbes eat it. And when they eat it, they can turn it into hydrogen sulfide. That's very corrosive. And it actually starts to eat away at the pipes and the infrastructure that these oil people use to
Highly
transport.
toxic as well, you know.
It's highly toxic, absolutely. And so anyway, it wasn't hard to build a relationship on the importance of understanding subsurface biospheres. We then had to convince them that we were in a decent enough position to carry out this research in Yellowstone.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, you're a professor, I'm a professor. I don't get to leave my desk very often. Have you managed to build the life that for this project, similar projects, you actually get to go out and do some of the field work yourself, or is this mainly teams of grad students, undergrads, postdocs doing the hands-on work?
Yeah, this is the unfortunate part of kind of growing up in the academic system. And so here's my advice to all young researchers out there is as you progress through your graduate studies, postdoctoral studies, and hopefully eventually get a tenure track position, the amount of time you get to do science starts to go down. The amount of time you spend organizing people and advising people and mentoring people and having meetings and so on and so forth, sitting in front of your computer goes up. And so you always got to make sure to take care of yourself. And one great way to do so is to involve yourself in field-based research. And so, yeah, a lot of this work was conducted by graduate students and postdocs, but I made sure that when it was possible that I would join them. And it really provides a great context too to the research. Like if you get a bunch of samples back or a bunch of data back from an environment that you've never been to yourself. Well, it's really hard to contextualize that and put it within, the greater understanding of the environment that you're studying. And so, for me, I'm fortunate. In the summer months, I tend to go out into the field, at least once a week, maybe more than that to help students. Maybe I'm just carrying a bunch of equipment and supplies for those students, but that's fine. At least I get to get away from my desk and get outside and experience the research once again.
Yeah, I think for me, I had one job where we had a project out in Crested Butte, Colorado, which is about a 5 hour drive from where I am in Fort Collins. And probably the happiest I've ever been at work was one day when we had to construct about 9 foot tall scaffolds to put our instruments on, and we were doing air quality measurements. And we had to be above snowpack. And I just got to carry very heavy metal pieces of scaffolding about 300 yards from the truck to the site, and it was snowing lightly and it was perfect temperature and I had no thoughts, just vibes. It was great. So yes, I also agree with the try to construct time for, whatever lights you up, whether it's field work or something, coding, right? I don't get to do much coding anymore, but just to carve out that piece of time is really great advice. Um,
You,
so
you,
going
you,
back,
you
yeah, go ahead.
just real quick, I want to butt in there
Yeah.
because that's a connection I didn't know existed between us. And so there is a really neat field biology station out in just north of
Ramble?
Crested Butte. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
actually was fortunate enough to go and spend a summer studying there. And it was a life-changing experience. And anybody listening to this podcast, it's the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab. At least look it up. If you have an opportunity to visit, even cooler. If you have an opportunity to go spend a summer there as one of their research experiences for undergraduate students, take that opportunity. It is an amazing, life-changing experience.
Yeah, I definitely recommend. I'll link Ramble's website in the show notes. This was It was a project led by DOE. It was called SAIL, and Dan Feldman out of Florence Berkeley National Lab was reading it. It was all on hydrology, but air quality, aerosols, my background, back in the day in grad school, impacts precipitation. So we had the chance as a small company to go out and put a bunch of sensors out, and we collaborated with Ramble. We had a site on if you remember that hill right next to all the housing, we had a site up on the top of the hill with all the other sensors up there.
I think it's called the Queen's Maid or something like that, or I forget. But that's where they get all their drinking water from, is that snowfield that you can see right from where you were
Yeah.
probably sampling. Yep,
Yeah, great place.
it
So
is.
going back to the paper, another thing I wanted to touch on before we even get to the cool findings was just the methods section. I honestly was very impressed. I will admit, not my field, not my background. I didn't read every word because I don't need to go out and replicate what you did. But I feel very strongly that this paper, someone could go out with a little bit of training and pretty closely, obviously, they would have to have the opportunities that you had of the sites and everything. But there's a strong component of replicability, there we go, in your paper that I feel I don't see that often anymore. So I'm curious if you can dive in a little bit on, what was the training that you got to make you, so confident in writing this way, and how do you help your students, your trainees, go on to write in this manner?
Well, it's a really important question. And so, one of the things science is I don't care what political spectrum you come from, but science is under fire, and maybe in some cases rightfully so. And I say that because if somebody can't reproduce the science and the conclusions that you generated in your study, that's potentially problematic, right? It makes it less easy for the public or other scientists, for that matter, to believe, let alone politicians that are charged with supporting our research, either through their support of NSF or NASA or the Department of Energy. And so it becomes really important to make your work reproducible. And so in my case, this is tough, right? Because there's no way that anybody's going to go to Yellowstone and be fortunate enough to observe that series of earthquakes that we sampled. That's just way too random. But nonetheless, we gave everybody, at least hopefully, to the ability of our extent, our own abilities, all of the methodology that would be required to go and perform something similar. And my graduate advisor placed a premium on communication skills, oral and written communication skills, but those written communication skills really start with your methods section. And so I was always taught, you write your methods section so that your own mother could go out and repeat exactly what you did. And so that's what I've always done. And I wrote those methods that are in this paper, the PNAS Nexus paper, with the hope of being that anybody could pick up that paper and go and reproduce it, not just in Yellowstone, but in some other borehole across the world. But it starts there. And I would just say, when I start a student down the path of preparing a manuscript of their own, that's always where we start. Start putting your methods together, and then I iterate those methods with them. I clean them up. I make sure they're as broadly as understandable as possible. And not until those are finished do we start preparing figures and writing results. And so that's just the process I go through with all of my students. But it really began with my own training as a graduate student. And I've never forgotten that. And I think it's really important that we have robust methods sections, so that our science is always reproducible throughout history.
Yeah, and I think it really shines through with this paper. And if the, if you're listening and you're going, well, I don't write academic papers, Anna, Eric, I don't know why I should care. I'm kind of zoning out at this point. I mean, but do you have reports in your job, right? Like you probably have some sort of written something that you're doing that you need to communicate, and really thinking through, how do I make this so that my supervisor, my boss, my trainee can pick this up and run with it, instead of it being a 14 email, back and forth because you were not clear the first time around. So I think there's wisdom in this for everyone.
Well, I think so, and we're in such this fast-paced society now, where we're text messaging or emailing or whatnot, and those aren't often complete sentences. And just the art of communication in written form, I think, is something that we don't want to forget about as a society in any form.
Yeah, I highly agree. And I mean, I won't cast aspersion one way or another, but I suspect you're not sitting there kind of having ChatGPT or some other AI, you know, through this for you. You're actually going through the process of thinking while you're writing. Because I know for me, at least when I'm writing, I learn, oh, this is what I didn't understand. This is what I need to go dig into deeper. If I let ChatGPT do that for me, well, I just lost that opportunity.
Yeah, well, yes, absolutely. Well, so just to first, I don't use AI for anything. Now that being said, I'm not knocking the use of artificial intelligence either, or chat GPT, but let me just give you an example. I could now ask chat GPT to go and write something similar to what I wrote in that PNAS Nexus paper, because now it has that text to train their AI models with. Before I wrote this paper, it had no idea how to write that paper. And so, creativity cannot be replicated. Intelligent creativity cannot be replicated by Chat GPT or AI. It never will be. And if we're going to push the boundaries of science, we can't do so with artificial intelligence solely, right? We can use it as a tool, but that intellectual creativity has to come from us.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't put it better myself. I think that replicates my feelings of yes, it can do something that's already been done, and I'm happy to use ChatGPT for some simple coding task that I probably did 10 years ago in grad school that I'm not going to take the 2 hours to refigure out, but I'm not going to let it take away my creative parts of my job, or my emotional parts of my job, right? I struggle with the people that can't write a challenging email. They have, AI write the challenging email for them. I'm like, no, we should all work on our emotional intelligence and learn how to communicate through the hard times too.
Totally, totally.
Anyways, I tangent. Okay, the paper itself, I'm not going to color with any of my like, oh, I thought this was really exciting. I want to hear from you. What do you think are the most key findings of this paper? What are your favorite findings of this paper?
Yeah. So let me step back. The project itself that Keck funded was supposed to involve an auto sampler that we were going to build and design and build and deploy in Yellowstone, and a whole series. Well, part of it was COVID. We got funded for this project right at the start of COVID. Didn't make anything easier for any of us, including us in this project. But then there was a whole series of hardships that took place with members of our team. And long story short, we're the auto sampler that was supposed to be the seismically triggered auto sampler that would collect a series, an earthquake would come through of a defined magnitude. It would trigger this sensor that would cause it to start a whole sequence of sampling events, six in total, that would preserve all of the samples essentially that we collected as part of the study that I outline in this paper. Long story short, we had a lot of delays associated with developing that auto sampler and fabricating it. It is developed and fabricated now, after the study was conducted. So anyway, that's kind of the backstory. We were supposed to do this all autonomously. In lieu of that, I just said to one of my graduate students, let's not wait for the auto sample. We can be the auto samplers. We're close enough to Yellowstone National Park. As a crow flies, we're something like 60 miles is all from Yellowstone. Now, to get to our particular field site in this study, it's about 4.5 hours. It's all the way on the southern end of the park, down by Yellowstone Lake. I just said, let's just go start sampling. Let's get a baseline understanding of what's going on in the subsurface in this aquifer, see what we see, and we'll go from there. And the student and a postdoc agreed. So we all went down and we sampled, and we went down a month later and we sampled again. And that's when things really got exciting. Okay. And so we're sampling these waters from about 100 meters depth. And, microbiologists or geochemists or not, I don't think most of us would expect things to change that drastically in the subsurface,
Hmm.
right? There's no sun day night cycle to drive temporal variation or diurnal variation. Um, but nonetheless, between that first sampling event and that second sampling event, we could tell things had changed drastically. Not just, once we got back to the lab, in the field, some of the field assays that we would conduct, we knew things were changing. And And so on the way back, we're just like, what's going on? Well, one of my students, during the drive started looking at some of the seismic logs that were being reported, and sure enough, there'd been a seismic swarm, an earthquake swarm that had started right there locally. And so that was
What
very
is the
lucky, right?
definition of a swarm?
Yep. So it's a series of seismic events that are located in space and time.
Okay.
So they're all kind of centered in the same area. They're all occurring, say, over the same month or several months. And so that was one exciting element. And then we just continued sampling through that seismic swarm until it started to dissipate. Well, we would have kept sampling had it not been November and, feet upon feet of snow keeping us from doing our work. But so that was the first thing. The second thing that was really exciting was we sampled for dissolved gases, um, and the amount of hydrogen gas that we measured. So I told you earlier, I wouldn't call it an obsession, but it's certainly a fascination with hydrogen gas. Hydrogen gas is rocket fuel. That's what NASA uses to launch stuff into space. Well, microbes eat it. It's the most energy dense fuel on planet Earth, and microbes love it. And so we stuck our samples on the gas chromatograph, and we're quantifying what was in there. And we measured the highest concentration of hydrogen ever measured in the park by a long shot. So we were excited by that. And then we started getting some of the other data trickling back that started to point to, that these changes were certainly these chemical changes were starting to drive changes in the biological community too. So this whole trickle effect, right? Seismic activity was perturbing the system. It was responding at the level of geochemistry as we had predicted, and then the microbes themselves were responding to it. And that was kind of one of these. We thought it was going to happen. That was our hypothesis going into the research, but rarely, I mean, this is going to make scientists sound bad, but rarely are you ever really correct with your hypothesis, right? I mean, but we were fairly spot on with it.
Just
That was
have to
pretty
start
neat.
somewhere and then go from
Yeah,
there. It's fine.
that's exactly right, and that's what we do. But in this case, we were pretty spot on, and that was fun. And then, as we kind of got all of the data together and massaged and thought we had a story developing, I asked one of my graduate students, like, do you think we could replicate some of this in the lab? And so we got permission to take some rocks from Yellowstone, and we actually crushed them up in the lab and saw a lot of the when we crushed those rocks and looked what kind of nutrients or energy substrates were released. We noticed that the same types of things that we noticed in this well, in this aquifer, were being released from these rocks, supporting the idea that when you crush rock, a whole series of things can happen, but these hydrogen gas and even organic carbon can be released from those rocks, which we should expect microbes to respond to. So a lot of really fun things took place during this paper, but those are kind of the highlights.
You have so many different pieces, you have so many different pieces, and I feel like there's two-ish schools of thought when it comes to writing paper. One is you take a little slice of a result and you say, this is a paper. And another is I have many pieces and I'm going to collate them into a story. And the second one, the many pieces one, it's harder to make into a smooth story necessarily. So how did you kind of manage to tease out that storyline for this project?
Yeah, it was really hard.
I can imagine.
It was easily the hardest paper that I've ever written, but also one that I'm most proud of as well. And it's because of what you just said. It's we call it the least publishable unit. And so there's a lot of papers that are out there in the literature that are those the least publishable unit, and we're guilty of that at times too. But in this case, we could have carved this up into multiple papers, no question about it. But in our minds, it felt better and more holistic to fold it all into one and tell us the most complete story that we possibly could with the data that we had. And so that's what we did. But it took me an entire summer to take the data sets that we had and turn it into this paper. And again, it was not easy. It took a lot of trial and error. Um, you know, Professors have writer's block too. So there was a lot of that. And where do I take this? How do I connect these ideas, idea A and idea B, and do so in a way that a reader is going to appreciate? But I think at the end of the day, we were able to put together a story that was fairly comprehensive and one that I think, that the community will appreciate for in posterity.
Yeah, no, I mean, frankly, I'm impressed it only took a summer because this seemed like just an immense amount of work. And I commend you for, taking on the challenge, right? I feel like some people, as they progress in their career, they hit some stage where they just want to rinse and repeat, essentially, right? And it sounds like you're still pushing your boundaries, just you're still growing. Do you have any kind of broad lessons learned from writing what you said is the hardest paper you've ever written to this point?
Yeah, I do. And it's maybe not what everybody wants to hear, but persistence pays off.
It does. Yeah.
And sometimes the best thing that you need to do to yourself and for yourself when you're writing a paper is go take a walk or go for a hike or go for a run or go for whatever it is that allows your mind to release so that you can re-engage with those ideas in a meaningful, in a fruitful manner. Um, trying to just continue to hammer and hammer and hammer on things is not a productive strategy, in my opinion. And so your brain is a muscle. And if you just ran a marathon yesterday and you want to wake up and run another marathon today, my guess is it's not going to go very well day two. And if you just keep doing that and doing that and doing that, it's not productive, and you're hurting that muscle. You're not allowing that muscle to heal and do what it needs to do. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would just say to anybody that any young scientists out there is that it's okay to feel uncomfortable. And it's okay to feel like you're treading into an area um, that you're uncomfortable in. And I work. We're all trained as a microbiologist or a geologist or an aerosol chemist or whatever it may be, right? An atmospheric scientist. But the real interesting research takes place between those disciplinary boundaries. And if other people had been there, there's probably some history of that, some documentation of that. Well, the chances are pretty good that where you end up, if you go on that path of trying to work interdisciplinarity, you're going to find yourself in a place that nobody's been before,
Yeah.
and it's gonna be uncomfortable. And embrace that and understand that your advisor, your collaborators, even the reviewers that ultimately review your manuscript will tell you whether or not you've wandered too far or you've interpreted things wrongly. And that's the approach I take. I've never taken a geology or a geochemistry class in my life. It might surprise you if you read this paper, but I have taught it to myself, and of course, I've had a lot of colleagues along the way that have kind of helped me in that regard. Um, but until somebody tells me I'm wrong, I'm going to keep going. And it's an uncomfortable journey, but that's where the true enjoyment comes in, is making discoveries that otherwise couldn't have been made.
Yeah, I think that's really great. And the it's okay to be uncomfortable is a really key point. I think I've realized this about myself is that I can let myself fall into bad habits if I'm in that uncomfortable zone. Let's say I'm at my desk, I'm pushing forward on some sort of research, and I find myself checking my email 30 times. Well, it's because I'm uncomfortable and I want to do something easy that's fun and might have a spicy little payoff of a good email. So I have to kind of like, all right, Anna, no, you must stay on the thing that's a little edgy for you. I also like the take the break advice. I feel like I used to feel like I was too scattered all over the place, and now I feel like it's my superpower where I have a bunch of interests in different things in work and different things in personal life, and I'm just kind of constantly changing around. And I've realized that if I ever want to do something well, I better not start it on the day that it's due because it needs
Oh,
at least that 24-hour cycle, right? Prepping for this interview, I read your paper 2 days ago. Yesterday, I set up some questions. This morning, I looked at them and I went, oh, yeah, okay, here's the questions I want to ask. I thought about it on my bike ride. Am I uncomfortable doing my first interview with someone on a topic that I know nothing about? Sure. Am I having a lot of fun? Absolutely. And, this is where I think that growth comes in. So yeah, completely agree with everything you're saying. And kind of tying into the podcasting thing. So I've looked at your website some, and I see that your team has published several high impact papers. So for those of you listening who haven't really thought about academic publishing, that often they're sort of the trifecta of journals: Science, Nature, and Proceedings of the National Academies of Science, or PNAS. So PNAS Nexus, the journal this article is in, is a journal under that PNAS umbrella. I see that you guys have journals under the Nature umbrella. I don't know if you have Science as well. You've done interviews. Your team has done interviews as well. We've talked a lot about the written communication piece, but do you also have some insights, tips, thoughts on the more oral communication piece? Because obviously you're very comfortable talking about what you're doing. I suspect it hasn't always been that way for you, right? You had to grow over time.
No, yeah, I mean, being nervous when you're talking to people, especially reporters or even podcast hosts, um, that it's totally normal. And I think people would be lying to themselves to say that even the most successful oral communicators don't have some nerve when they're entering, but um, entering an interview or a presentation, a communication type of thing. But the best, know what you're talking about. And if you know what you're talking about, and know what you don't know too, right? So know what your limits are, and so speak as simply and as plainly as you possibly can. Keep things as general as you possibly can until you get asked to be more specific about things. Because again, we're not trying to be exclusive, or we shouldn't be trying, scientific communication. You think about why it's important. Why is it important for us to have this conversation here and for you to broadcast it across, use your megahorn to broadcast it as far as you possibly can? Well, it's very simple for me to explain why I think it's important. The same is true for newspaper interviews or if I'm fortunate enough to be on television or something along these lines. It's the taxpayers fund our research.
Yep.
And if I cannot, or scientists in general cannot communicate to taxpayers payers why the research that we do is important, then I should have zero expectations whatsoever that those taxpayers are going to support that research. And when the NSF or the NASA or the DOE budget gets cut, I should expect that. To combat that, to ensure that taxpayers continue to want to support our research, I should tell them what I'm doing and why it's important. Um, and maybe it's not, important like monetarily. There's no money to be made in the study that we're talking about here today. But there is importance in it, and that this is how the planet that sustains all of us works. There's importance in knowing that. And so communicating that with taxpayers, I think, is really important. But to do so effectively, you can't talk above them. You can't be exclusive of them um, because they're not doctoral degree, you know, card carrying microbiologists or geochemists or geologists. They're who knows what they're doing for their jobs. And so but it's equally as important for me to communicate that to them regardless of what their background is. And so again, keep it simple. Know your boundaries, know your limits. One thing I will tell you is that people oftentimes try to get you to oversell what it is that you're discussing, and be wary of that. Don't overpromise. Whether it's a technology or the importance of a finding, just keep it for what it is.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. Have you had chances to proactively communicate your findings, or has it always been people reaching out to you?
I definitely have had a lot of opportunities, and so for an example, I lead field trips every summer into Yellowstone as part of the Yellowstone Forever program. That's Yellowstone National Park's nonprofit arm. I there's a an initiative called the International Microbiology Literacy Initiative, and it's essentially we're building an online, publicly available, freely available textbook to promote microbiology literacy in the schools all across the world. And so we commonly will prepare a chapter. I've got one that was due a month ago. I still need to finish it. That's a goal for for my holiday break. So yes, I seek those opportunities out. I don't wait for them to knock on my door. I try to be proactive about that.
Yeah, well, we all appreciate that because I think I mean I think very strongly that there's many reasons why we are in the spot we are right now in America as a scientific engineering community, and communication is a piece of that. There's just been this continued, like you say, the talking above, not talking to. It just doesn't feel like there's good dialogue happening, and that's something I really want to figure out in my life. How do I improve, and how do I help other people grow on?
Yeah, and I think part of that, and I'm not making excuses for scientists or engineers by any stretch, but it's pretty remarkable how much is expected of us,
A lot.
and
Yeah.
time wise, and I sometimes am jealous of people that at 5 o'clock get to turn it off.
Mm.
Um, I'm also jealous of the people that don't have to wake up at 4 in the morning, anxious about whether or not they're going to be able to get everything that they need to get done today, type of thing, which was me at 4 o'clock this morning, unfortunately. And so it's being a professor, there's a lot of challenges, and sometimes, something's got to give,
Yeah.
right? There's simply not enough time. You don't have enough energy to do it all. And oftentimes those things that give are the things that you don't necessarily get credit for. So, my performance at the university is judged by um, the number of papers I produce, the amount of grant dollars that I bring into the university, my scores, how well I teach my classes, but not on how well I engage with the public about what I do.
Yeah. Which is unfortunate. And I think, what I would say is, yes, it's very important that we all give ourselves grace. And not all of us are gifted communicators, and that's okay. We don't all have to be excellent. And I think that's where that sort of team environment comes in. Maybe like I never want to stand in front of someone and talk. I want to be in the field or on my computer 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, whatever it is. Who on your team can you help understand what you do so that that team member can go forth and talk about what you do, right? My team succeeds because they tell me what they're doing, and then I can talk in front of an audience and say, all right, this is this research. It was done by this researcher in my group, and I'm happy to present it today. That kind of interaction, I think, is really key. So yeah. Well, I know you're super busy. I want to be very respectful of your time. I'll certainly link your website and paper in the show notes. Are there any other locations people can follow your group and your work?
Those are probably the better locations. At least they're places to start. And there's a lot of links on our website too, if you want to follow up on individual research projects or individual people more so than that. I'll just go back though to one of the things that we were just talking about the importance of communication. Good universities have strong communications offices.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons that you probably heard about this paper is because that's the case at Montana State. We have teams that members of our team that are dedicated to promoting our work and getting it out there in ways that are, digestible by the average person. And so, I think universities are trying. They're trying to help us. But there's more work to be done. And I think podcasts and people like yourselves are a great service to all of us scientists and engineers. And so I want to thank you for doing what you're doing as well.
Yeah, well, it's been super fun. It's sort of the new big challenge in my life, and it's certainly helping me become a better communicator, right? I feel like it's a win-win all around. I'm going to be a better teacher, better communicator. Hopefully, more people learn about what a lot of people are doing out there in the world. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I'll let you get back to hopefully going outside and enjoying the beautiful Bozeman, Montana. Ah, how good was that? How fun was that interview? How awesome is Dr. Boyd? He was so kind, so generous with his time. If I were to say a learn and move your feet from today's episode, I really loved his bit about, writing methods like your mother or your grandmother could follow them, right? I think that's really good reminder for us. It's hard to describe what we do scientifically. I know that I still struggle with it. So this, clear direction of like, you just have to write things clearly and replicably is so important in science and engineering fields. So fantastic interview. Couldn't be happier. I do want to remind that this podcast is not affiliated with my research and teaching roles at Colorado State University, but it's a strong part of my belief that we can all have jobs we love. And talking to Dr. Boyd today really it lit a little fire under me. It made me feel more excited about what I do. So if you love this episode, please share it with a friend. Scientist or not, these Journal Club episodes are really meant to be for everyone, not just people who are in STEM fields struggling with specific STEM-related work blockers. Obviously, if you leave a review, that's really helpful on your podcast app. Music is always by XS. You can follow us on STEMdentity at Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. And if you're excited about potentially working with me, please schedule a free 30-minute work audit call. The link is also in the show notes. We can dive into some of your top work blockers. If the call feels good, if we are a good match, I'd love to continue to work with you one-on-one through coaching. You can find everything in the show notes. And of course, I like to end every episode with a song of the week. And even though this is sort of a bonus episode, of course we're going to have a song of the week because I love music and I can't help myself. And today, because we talked about Yellowstone, I thought about, all right, I had my disc Walkman when we would drive up and back to Yellowstone, and I listened to a ton of music. And what song pops into mind when I think of those trips, those driving trips to Yellowstone? What popped into mind was The Strokes. That album, their first album, came out right at the height of me listening to music and driving up to Yellowstone, rather being driven by my parents. So Last Night by The Strokes is my song of the week. Fun hit. I'm sure you've heard it, most likely, but if not, check it out. It's a fun one. All right. Just thank you so much for being here. I can't believe how fun that interview was. I hope it makes you excited about science and engineering. Maybe it inspires you to go take a trip to Yellowstone. I mean, it's one of the most magical places on Earth, so let's enjoy it while we have it. We'll talk soon.